Hello and welcome to Pokesports Plus, an extra podcast by Pokesports. I'm Mike and I play with one Pokemon on the field.
I'm Kevin. I play with two Pokemon on the field.
And today we're joined by Joseph Ugarte, otherwise known as JoeUX9. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hello. How are we doing? Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you. So Joe is a seasoned VGC player who, if you've been noticing over the past, I want to say 8 or so months, you'll see some of the major hits that he's been doing, just kind of running the gambit through regional competitions or regional championships. Joe, I believe you're also a streamer. Is that correct?
Yes, I do stream on Twitch. I also do make content on YouTube. A little that one's a little inconsistent right now, but the streaming I definitely do pretty often.
Joe, tell us a little bit about your competitive history. How'd you get into Pokemon? How long have you been doing it?
Yeah, so the story of how I got into competitive is actually pretty funny. So back before I really played Pokemon or anything, I used to play this game called Injustice 2, right?
Nice.
Which was a fighting game. And I was really into it, right? And I think it was because I was still young, because I'm 19 right now, so I guess how many years ago was that now? Almost 4 or 3. So back then, I think it was one of those stereotypical parent things, oh, your grades aren't good enough, so take away your games for you to focus. So my PS4 got taken away, and I think I had my DS, right? So I started playing Sun and Moon again.
Oh wow!
And then I ended up opening YouTube and seeing 2017 World Finals or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I watched it, and then I started watching a bunch of VGC videos. I'm oh, this is really cool. So I'm I kind of want to do this now. So I started getting the mons in game, doing all that stuff, trading with people, right? And it's just funny to think back to, because it was just this chance thing that had my PS4 not been taken away, I don't think I ever would have gotten into it, you know. So what ended up happening was I was okay, I'm gonna go to this tournament in Brooklyn, which was it was a 50-man PC. This was back in 2017.
Yeah,
I went. I really loved it. Then I went to Hartford Regionals. I went 4-4. It wasn't really overwhelming performance or anything, but I really loved the game. So since then, I just was playing it. I wasn't super seriously competing. I don't know how depth you want me to go into how I started, because I can do you want me to go through my entire stuff, or do you want to kind of break it down?
Yeah, no, I want you to go through everything. Tell me every single thing.
Yeah, so then what ended up happening was I kind of was jumping in between going to some regionals, going to some locals, but I wasn't playing super consistently. And then what happened was in 2019 was really the year where I started kind of taking stuff seriously. So what ended up happening was I was going to a lot of locals. I went to NAIC. That was my first real good major performance, where I got top 32 there. And basically, so another chance thing that happened was, so I actually was very close to quitting the game after NAIC, because at the time I was in a long distance relationship with my ex, and I was going to quit so that I could get a job to be with her, right? So what ended up happening was we broke up, which obviously it sucked at the time, right? But what ended up happening from that is I was well, I'm not going to sit around and be sad. I'm I'm going to go compete now. And now I have the freedom to just go and compete. So I went really hard in on the season. I went to, I basically, what I said was, I was I'm going to get day 2 this year. So I just sat down, I grinded ladder for hours. I would literally for days in a row, just play over and over again, learn my team that I was using, which was Evil Dawn at the time, right? And I was just really grinding, so I was super prepared. And my first event was actually supposed to be Atlantic City in Ultra, because I had topped the Showdown ladder right before with Evil Dawn. I was ready to go there, and my flight ended up getting canceled because of Chicago weather. So it was kind of a heartbreaker. But then I was okay, now I really need to do well, because I really want to do this, you know. So I showed up to Knoxville Regionals, got top 4. Then I went to Richmond, got top 8. Then I went to Portland, I won. And then I went to Daytona and I got finals. So I had a really good ultra season. The hard work really paid off. And it's kind of worked into my mentality now as a player, that this game kind of rewards you for the amount of hard work you put into the game, I think, and your practice.
How do you mean?
So for example, I know a lot of people are oh, this game involves a lot of luck and stuff, but you're gonna see consistency if you really I think invest time into working on yourself as a player, and not being oh yeah, this because this is my mentality about the game, and the way I always look at it. Even if you've lost to something like hacks, you have put yourself in that position to lose. I don't think there's ever a game or a set where you can be I lost 100% because of hacks. Like you always put yourself in a position to lose. I think like as a player, your goal should be to like play as close to perfectly as possible. So like for me, like I was, and like my mentality always going into these tournaments wasn't like, I never had the mentality of like, oh, I'm just going to go there and get like points, right? Or I'm just going to go there and get like CP. I was always like, I'm coming into this tournament and I want to win, like every single time. And like, and I told myself, I'm like, I'm not happy with anything less than a win, because I'm like, that's what I know I can do. So like, I'm going to keep working towards that. And like, I think that's like obviously different mentalities work for different people, but like that's always helped me as a player over the course of how long I've been playing. So then basically, I end up getting the travel award, which is like really cool. And I end up I'm supposed to go to Dallas, like Atlantic City, because of Chicago weather. I can't go to Dallas. It gets canceled. Right. I just partied that weekend instead, I think, which was fine. And then what happened after that? I think I went to Australia to compete, which was really fun. Honestly, like the trip to Australia kind of like really confirmed to me. I'm like, yeah, I want to keep doing this. Like I was like, I really love like just traveling around, meeting people, spending time with people. And like what my favorite part about this game is that like you just get to meet a ton of people and just like connect with them, you know, like, and I don't think like any other game does it the same way that Pokemon does. And I think that's like a big appeal to me, even just traveling in general. And then I went to Collinsville Regionals. Both OCIC and Collinsville were like okay. I wasn't really happy with it. And then Corona happened, so I was like kind of annoyed because I'm like, I really wanted to like have a good finish like I had in 2019. And like back then I was still at the level where people were kind of like, oh, maybe Ultra was his best format and like he can't really continue to perform. So like being able to like kind of like, that's why I really grinded like online tournaments after, because I was like, I want to like show that I'm still able to perform at this level, you know. But like that's pretty much everything leading up to like Players Cup. So.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely going to say end of 2019. You finished 2019 strong, and so like just looking at your achievements there with Daytona Beach and Portland Regionals and Pinnacle League Season 1. Anything that you can basically see on Wikipedia. The second I looked at that, I was like, oh man, once 2020 starts. Anybody looking at that back at the end of 2019 would have been like, oh wow, when 2020 starts, this guy's gonna be killing it. And then Corona happens, and obviously no one's going to regionals anymore. It's like, oh, that feels like such a missed opportunity. So what have you been doing instead?
Yeah, so you know what it is I think Corona has both been a good thing for me in a way, because like obviously like the situation itself isn't a good thing, correct, right? But like I think having time to like kind of like self-reflect and kind of like look at my flaws as like a player and just like kind of working on myself, and like when it like the way I always think of things is like the best way to learn is through teaching something, right? So like a big focus of mine while streaming has been like teaching the game to people, and I think like since I've started doing that and since I've started streaming consistently, I've become like a better player for it, because like it makes me more aware of like what I'm doing, because like for example, like even though it may just be like a little like bad mistake I make on a game, for example, that cost me a game, right? Sure. Someone else is watching that and they're internalizing that. They're like, oh, he probably made the correct play, but like it just didn't work out. Like, no, I'm like, I always try to like check myself and like point out where I get stuff wrong, because it's like other people are watching you and they're kind of internalizing what they're watching, even though it may not be like a super like conscious thing, more like a subconscious thing. Because like I know a lot of people who a few subs that like talk to me and they're like, yeah, I go through your videos to watch how you play these teams and see how you play, right? And they're like, why did you do this play in this part? Because it seems like you could have done this and this better. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm like, and it's really good to be able to do that, because I think being able to like kind of recognize your faults and like that stuff is good. And I think like for me, like streaming is like a good way to kind of like bring that kind of mentality out where you're kind of like working on yourself consistently. And like I think streaming has been like one of the best things for me as a player in general and as like a competitor.
I was gonna say, I was watching the YouTube video where you talk about like how to improve as a VGC player, and something that really stood out is that a lot of VGC players would be like, oh, this is an unlucky game, oh, you know, just trying to blame it on hacks. They think they did every play the best possible, but what your perspective on it is completely different. It's oh, I got hacks here, but there's something that happened this game that I could have done better. And then that's like the thing about VGC is it's so hard to be perfect, but you always have to strive for perfection. And until you hit that point, you're never completely satisfied with your gameplay. And I think like that mindset is such a good mindset if you're just trying to to improve yourself as a player. And clearly, you're improving yourself as a player. You got like top 4 in the qualifiers for the Players Cup. That's a pretty big deal in 2020.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think like that for me was like kind of the result I was like looking for. Cause like one thing that like why Players Cup meant so much to me, and like I even like stopped streaming as much because I was like really focused on getting this result. I was like, I know that like I want to stream and people like do want to watch me, but I'm like, I need to prioritize like me performing well in this tournament, because like not only is it just a thing for like outside perception, but it's like I want to prove to myself that I can do this, you know? And I'm like, I'm going to put in 110% to reach this goal. What I found like so interesting about this tournament, right, is like it's a huge mental game, because you have gaps in between your like basically in between the weeks, like you really have to be like mentally, like you have to like kind of like endure all the stress that you're facing, right? Because like you could have a really good weekend where you're playing really good Pokemon. You go 3-0 the first week, right? And then the next week you could play really bad Pokemon and just lose, you know? So I think like kind of being able to like keep calm, like kind of like stay focused and like just like practice was like really like a useful skill, and like not getting in your own head, because I know like for a tournament as long as this, like if you get in your own head, it can really like hurt you, I think, in your run and everything.
Absolutely. Kevin, you know all about getting in your own head for the Players Cup.
Oh boy, yeah.
That's basically how you got out of it.
Yeah. Don't change your team last minute, guys.
Yeah,
but I was gonna say, like, that's like the equivalent, like that gap week is the equivalent of the lunch break in actual tournaments. There's just some players, me included, that I'll come back from lunch and completely bomb the rest of my sets.
You lose momentum. Yeah, there's something to be said about losing momentum.
Yeah.
It's so funny that you're talking about last minute team changes, because my team choice was actually made at like 5 a.m. the day teams were due. And like this like I was just like I forgot what it was. I think like literally I was just talking to Chuppa, another player, and I was like, dude, I'm like, this 6 was like top of ladder. I'm like, because I think it was originally like a Japanese stand team that like we saw on ladder, and I was just like, well, this was, I talked to him like after the fact. First I saw it and I was just like, oh, this looks fine. So then I changed around the sets to what I was more comfortable with. And then I was like, this feels really good. Cause like, that's the thing. Like, I think you have to go with comfort, but like reasonable comfort. Like you have to use something that's still good. You know, like for example, like I was comfortable back with like Gengar Bisharp in Series 2, but I'm not running it now because I know it's bad, you know? But like, I've also used Excadrill and Tyranitar in a lot of teams. That's something I'm comfortable with, and they're still good, and you can build around that pretty reliably, you know? And I don't think there's like, it's so interesting because I think in competitive, sometimes people get like this mentality that you have to be like super creative or make the call for Players Cup, you know, like come up with this really creative team, when in reality, if you give if you pick a team that gives you enough like options to just like win the game, and it's like really a consistent team, like that's all you need. Like that's what the best players do. That's why you like when people are like, oh, like VGC isn't different, it's not because like people aren't running like that different teams. It's because the teams that are always on top are going to be the teams that are running like consistent options. Like for example, the one I ran, like it was both me and Conan ended up making top 4 with Sand. We obviously had different versions, but like that's what ended up happening. Like
Sand
I think
teams. Sand teams in 2020.
Yeah, I think Dezu actually made it too with Sand, if I remember correctly, in Europe. So yeah, there was a bunch of Sand.
What about your team do you think makes it so viable for the current meta? So
this is what I like do. So I do like coaching and stuff. And like one thing I always tell people is like you have to make sure your teams have a lot of reliable options, right? So I know a lot of people get stuck on like this kind of idea of like you need speed control in your teams and stuff. Like I don't actually necessarily believe in that. I think teams that enable you to like function regardless of what necessarily like speed interaction you're at. So for example, if they have Tailwind up or if they have Trick Room up, like if your team is bulky enough and it can position well enough, like you don't really need speed control to be able to do that. Like obviously there's like pseudo speed control, and like for example, I had Dragon Dance, Dragapult. I had I Airstream with my Togekiss and Airstream with my Dragapult, obviously. But like for the most part, there was no speed control really, right? And for me, I was like, I want a team that's going to be very bulky. It's not going to force me to max early, so I don't need to click the Dynamax button in turn 1. And that's like a big thing I talked to on my stream. I'm like, I think a really bad habit in this format is there are a lot of teams that rely on maxing something turn 1, and if you don't capitalize off of that max, you lose way more than you gain. So for example, like a PZ team, like if you stall out all 3 turns of their max successfully and they max turn 1 and you still have yours, they're at a huge disadvantage. Same with Cinderace, right? And like I think like as you're seeing, like a lot of the teams on top aren't those teams that are like really aggressive Cinderace stuff that you may have expected looking at usage, because the teams are obviously there were some Cinderace, but like it's not like all of them, because a lot of the teams involved smart play and not necessarily just trying to blow up what's in front of you, you know, and kind of positioning. Like Incineroar was really popular in this tournament. Why? It offers a lot of pivoting options. It has a lot of ways to reduce damage. For me specifically on my team, I ran Protect Incineroar, because normally with Incineroar, the kind of catch with it is like, you don't have Protect on it, right? So like they can double target your Incineroar pretty safely and like basically guarantee like a knockout or like serious damage on that slot, right? So the logic of Protect was, I was like, well, if I have Protect, they don't know for sure that they can get that damage off, because now I can just Protect and swap out my other like slot. So it was like kind of little changes like that on the team that like really helped me. And like for me, like this is my kind of like team checklist when I go into it. I'm like, what are my focus maxers? I like having 3 Mons and 4 at most that like maxing, because I don't like having a lot of like conflicting like kind of choices.
Right.
And like I like to have Mons that don't rely on max. Like the only Mon that really relies on max on my team is Dragapult, right? Like I'm not bringing Dragapult if I'm not maxing it. But aside from that, like all my other Mons are a little more flexible, right? And then I wanted to include Redirection. I had 2 of those, right? I wanted to include Intimidate, which I had in Incineroar, and Stat Reduction, which was also Incineroar, and Fake Out. So it's like obviously the 3 best things about Incineroar, right? And then I kind of wanted a decent like type spread to kind of like support Sand, because obviously Sand is a little weak to fighting moves and like water moves. So like having all that redirection really helped. And then I kind of wanted to have like a good kind of like I wanted to have like multiple cores in the team that I could use efficiently, right? So I had a really good matchup versus Sun. I had like a lot of flexibility with my options versus a lot of different teams. And like, that's what I was really looking for. Except the one thing I messed up on is my team has a core of auto loss, because I forgot to put Heat Wave on my Kiss. Oh. And I didn't realize until after Team Lock was over that I was like, if I play Corviknight, I think I just lose. Like, like I just realized I was like, okay, that kind of sucks. But I was like, other than that, it's fine. But like, yeah, I really like, my goal was with the team is like basically 3 things: give myself the most options possible to reduce damage and like have redirection options, protect options, all that stuff, and avoid like too many focus maxers on it. 2 was just to have at least like some form of way of like kind of like reducing like Dynamax viability. So like for example, like Sleep on the Amoonguss, Intimidate, Redirection, right? Those all play into it as well. And then basically like my last thing was like I want weather control on the team, which was like Tyranitar and Excadrill, which was offered with Sand, and I want like consistent maxes that are gonna like have a lot of use in the tournament. So like that's kind of like everything that went into the team. Obviously it's a little more complex than that, but that's like kind of the basic like rundown of it, I think.
Now you mentioned a lot about Dynamaxes and how Dynamaxes are important, and like preserving your Dynamax is like actually a really big deal. We spoke to Edu, and he has very strong opinion on Dynamaxes. What do you think about Dynamaxes? Do you think they're healthy for the meta, or do you think that, you know, it's just another part of the game and you just kind of have to put up with it?
It's so interesting, right? Because I think in the beginning I really hated maxing, but the more I think I play 2020, the more I like it. And the reason why I like it more is because it rewards smart play, right? Like, and this is the biggest thing, right? Like, Dynamax at a fundamental level, right? People used to get annoyed because, oh, they make their Pokemon big turn 1 and they run through you, right? But that's not really in depth like how it functions.
Right.
I think there's actually a lot more depth to Dynamax, and knowing when to Dynamax, when it's appropriate to use it, how to save it, what to use it on. Like, there's so much nuance to it, I think, that like makes it a very interesting mechanic. Like, I wouldn't say it's my favorite mechanic, but it's definitely grown on me over time. And I think like the more I play this format and the more I invest into it, the more I really like enjoy it. And honestly, like, I don't know how I'd feel about Dynamax like later on down the line, but like I always try to have like a very like open mentality towards like different formats, because like the thing is if you come in being like, oh, and I was guilty of this in the beginning, right? But then I kind of realized like as a competitor, like having this mentality of like, oh, I hate this mechanic, you know, I wish it was something else, like that won't help you succeed as a player, because if you just focus on that and like you really want to do well regardless,
Right.
like you just need to like adapt, you know, like that's just how it is. Like every format changes. So it's just like, for me, I was like, I'm just going to get used to it. I'm going to learn it. And the more I played it, the more I liked it. I think it's something that like, for some people to grow on them, some people may always hate it, but like you're going to have to deal with it if you want to be a competitive player, right? Like that's just how it works. And whether or not that's popular, I think like I like, for me, my belief is if they keep it, I'd be happy with it. If they don't keep it, I'd be happy with it. But that's just because, like, for me, like, I always like want to challenge myself to learn something new. And I think, like, as I've continued to learn Dynamax, I've gotten a lot better with it, and like my understanding of it has improved a lot. So yeah, I mean, that's, I guess I didn't really give a full opinion on like how it works, like mechanic wise, like how I think it affects the game. But like, it's just, for me, like, I don't really like think about that. But like obviously I think about like how it functions in a game, right? But like I'm not like kind of like theorizing like what if it wasn't in the format, because that's useless. You know, I want to do well, and it's like, for me, the practical knowledge of like how do I use this tool, it's like what I focus on. So
No, I agree. I mean, even just the way that the mechanic works and the way that it feels when you actually play it, you're right. It felt very different before than it does now. At this point, people are experimenting with what happens if you hold a Dynamax, what happens if you use Max Guard a little bit more often, especially even with the Urshifus that have just come out, the people who are actually using those, when Max Guard is actually the right thing to do if you're predicting an Urshifu not to Gigantamax itself. Even in singles, to be completely honest, after this past weekend, some of our listeners might have listened to a story that I told about a 100 turn game that happened on OU singles, which, you know, isn't the most uncommon thing to happen in singles these days. You know, thinking now that maybe Dynamax Gigantamax actually kind of has a place in 6v6 singles. Like, it's, without it has become a very stall heavy kind of thing, and for whatever reason it's actually making me miss it, you know, having played VGC as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, right? Because like the mechanic, I don't think the mechanic will ever be like one where everyone's like happy with it, you know. Like, that's the thing. But that's how most mechanics are, right? Some people were like, oh, I didn't like megas, like which fine, like, you know, you don't like over centralization of like some mons, right? But like, in the end, the way I look at it, like in the end, like when you look at the top players, right, they're always going to be running like the same kind of teams, right? They're going to look fairly similar, and the reason why is because they're consistent, and that's like the main focus. So that's why, like, when megas were around, you'd see the same megas because those are the best options, and people who want to win are going to use the best options and get to the top with those options. So I think, like, kind of, it's so interesting, right? Because in other games, like I was having a conversation with someone, they mentioned like something like in Hearthstone, like people wouldn't really get like upset if like you told them like what a meta deck is, like how to use it, and like tell them to use it, right? But like sometimes in this game, like you're like, oh, just use this standard team, and people are like, oh, like it's not creative enough, you know, it's like the same mons. But like, what are we coming here to do? You know, like, we're coming here to win. You know, like, I want to win. I don't care about like, and don't get me wrong, you can be creative with like your sets and stuff, but like, I'm not coming here to lose. You know, I'm coming here to win. Like, I'm gonna bring the thing that gives me the best chance of winning.
No, yeah, for sure. And there is something to be said about meeting somebody halfway there, with somebody saying, I want to play a creative team, but I also want somebody to make this team for me. Well, if you really want that, then start with something that is super focused on the meta right now, something that is like really influential and really good, and then make the subtle tweaks that you think you can, and be creative that way. I think it always starts from just playing the game. You'll see the gaps in your team the more that you play it.
Put your sheer force life form Mawwells away, guys, please.
That's it. We've been saying it for years.
It's so interesting, right? Because sometimes I have people come into my chat and they're like, oh, do you think that this specific Pokemon is good, right? Or like, can I make a team around it? And then what I tell them is like, don't ever focus your team building around a specific mon if it's like a very niche mon. Because like, when niche mons are useful, it's usually on a very standard team that has like a lot of like use, but it has an issue with something specific, right? So for example, Gourgeist, you saw a lot of it at OCIC, right? It basically came out of nowhere. Why was Gourgeist on Edu's team? Trick or Treat for Tyranitar to remove its fighting weakness, otherwise the team would have had a little more difficulty with Conkeldurr, for example, right? So like, it's like a smart little like change, right? That like kind of makes your team better, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good on every team. And that's kind of like how I think these niche mons work. And when you try and build around something, you're kind of like over centralizing your idea around like trying to accommodate everything for this specific Pokemon to where you're not taking like the greater kind of like scheme of like everything you'll play like into like mind, you know?
It's kind of like working backwards. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think it should always start from like, what is a consistent kind of like group of mons I can use together that will net me success, right? For example, Amoonguss and Incineroar, very common pair, very good. Why? It reduces damage, has redirection, puts stuff to sleep, has disruption. Togekiss Excadrill, why? Support for Excadrill, can Swords Dance freely, all that kind of stuff, you know, that like plays into it. And like just using like proven mons at the start too also lets you understand what makes those mons good so that you can incorporate that into your own team building when you're trying to be creative later on down the line. So
agreed. And with that, let's take a little break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about tournaments. That is going to be the entire second half. We're going to speak about the Players' Cup. I want to talk about this X9 Streamer Cup. We're going to be talking about all that when we come back from the break. Welcome back to Pokesports Plus and our conversation with JoeUX9. Joe, let's talk about the Players' Cup. So as it stands right now, you are in the top 4. By the time that people listen to this, Players' Cup will be over.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of crazy getting there, to be honest. It was a long journey, I will say that, especially because of like having the gaps in between the weeks. Like as I mentioned before, it's a mentality thing, right? But it definitely felt like really good when it was over and I made it, because I was like, finally, like after all these weeks of like worrying a little bit, you know, or like stressing out a little bit, like I'm like, now I can just relax and like take it easy, you know, because like I did it. It was like it really did feel like basically like a marathon kind of Pokemon. I think it was much different than like the usual tournaments you're kind of dealing with. So
tell us a little bit about how the structure worked. How did you go through that?
Yeah, so the way it worked structure wise was essentially how it worked is double elimination, right? So if you lose really early, you're going to be playing a lot of Pokemon, like a lot. So it's really worthwhile to not lose early on. And basically the way it works, so double elimination, if you lose in winner's bracket, obviously you get sent to losers. And then you play out losers, and then if you lose again, you get eliminated, and it's best of 3. So basically, in terms of structure, it was broken down into 3 weeks. So we had 3 rounds on the first week, 2 rounds second week, and then 2 rounds if you're, and this is all assuming you're in winners, right? And then 2 rounds the last week, assuming you win. And then if not, you have more matches. So for me, my personal run was with week 1. What ended up happening is I just went 3-0 the first week. I was like pretty happy with my performances. We can go through matches if you want, or like I can tell you guys about that. But the second week I ended up going 2-0 as well. I pulled 2 pretty good matchups for me, so it wasn't too bad. And then the last week I actually lost my first match, so I got sent to losers, and then I just went out like 3 from there and made it in. So wow. It was a long run, but it was like a good tournament in general. I felt really good about my play like during the entire tour, except for my loss.
Did you find that there were a lot of games kind of packed into one day, or did you feel like they were spaced out well enough?
Not too much, to be honest. Like for me, like, but that's just because for me, like in week 1. I had a total of what? I think I went 6-2. So I played like 2 extra games, I guess. So like I played basically 8 games. It didn't feel too bad. Like it felt pretty doable. Then the next week where I got like 2 wins in a row as well. That one I actually went 2-0 both games, and they were pretty like good matchups for me. So I just kind of like swept. Yeah. So it wasn't really like that bad for me. Like I felt like I was done in like an hour and a half. I was just like, oh, okay, that's it. You know. And then the last one was like definitely the more of the marathon, because 4 matches obviously, and like when 3 of those are like when you're on the chopping block, you know, you're kind of like it adds a new layer to like your play, I think, and like how you're kind of like viewing things.
How do you feel that you perform under that kind of pressure? Do you?
I think it made me play better.
Really?
Honestly.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know normally people like kind of let that stuff stress them out, but like one thing that is kind of like a common theme throughout like losers bracket anyways, people play like a lot more scared and safe than they do in winners, right? Because at least when you're in winners, you can afford to take risks, right? And I think that was my biggest like flaw in like my first set of like this past weekend, because for me I was like, I played really safe versus a guy and I got punished like every single turn. So I'm like, I'm gonna start taking risks when I play, you know? And like this is something you'll actually end up maybe seeing on the Pokemon channel, but my winning in versus Ezreal, I think, was like a really good indicator, I think, of kind of the riskier play I was going with towards the end, because I was like, you kind of need to make these reads on your opponent to be the one who comes down on top, right?
Yeah.
You need to be the one who's like really making those risks, because if you don't take those risks and you play safe, especially if you have like kind of a neutralist matchup, it takes like one better call from them to like beat you, as opposed if you're keeping them on their toes and like making them question like every play, you know?
So when it comes to like making the risky plays, how did that come into effect with you knowing your opponent's team and you knowing your opponent knows your whole team? Like, did that make a big difference in your playstyle?
Yes. Yeah. So for me, like I brought a team too that like it didn't really matter if they knew my info. That's like, that's kind of the main thing I think with Players Cup. Like, all people try to bring creative teams that like once they know your info, it kind of like sucks, you know?
Yeah.
So I was just like, I'm not going to bring a team that relies so for example, like my team was pretty standard, like sand, right? But like them knowing that and them knowing my sets doesn't really matter. Like maybe with like my Lum X is kind of an important thing to know, but like it doesn't change anything. If they have to bring a Mungus to the matchup, they still have to bring a Mungus, you know? It just sucks for them. And that was kind of like the way I kind of like thought about my team in general. And like seeing my opponent's team actually, I think, benefited me more than them, because being able to like, I think versus sand, you always have like a specific game plan, right? But like, because it's a common team and that's just normally how it works. But like for people bringing like more unique teams or teams like I wasn't as familiar with from ladder, for example, when I saw the like team sheets, all the info and everything, it gave me this kind of like I think leg up almost, because like even though they are getting my info too, I think I'm benefiting more from their information than they're benefiting from mine.
Right, because people bring the unique teams versus you're bringing a sand team. Like that is
Yeah.
it is by and large a sand team.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I was actually having a talk about this with another streamer. We were talking about it on their stream. They disagreed with me. They think that like, it gives the opponent more of an advantage. But like, for me, I was like, okay, what's usually on Excadrill? And they're like Iron Head, Earthquake, Swords Dance, Protect. I'm like, okay, you just named my Excadrill set, right? And then like, I was just going through like one by one, and they were just naming all my sets. I'm like, this is exactly what I mean. Like, you already know what I'm running before I even like tell you, you know? So like, it doesn't hurt me for them to like see my stuff if they already know it.
Right. You're not going to run into the situation where a Pokemon that you're facing has a move that you had no idea was actually going to be on that Pokemon. You have that all in front of you.
Whoa, the Tyranitar has a weakness policy? No way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like I doubt you'd be surprised by that.
Through this, I've kind of come to appreciate open book a little bit more. Just because it turns the game into such a like chess match almost. Like, you know exactly what the opponent's working with, and you're just trying to use your brain.
Yeah, no, I mean, I made more reads, I think, because of the information I had, as opposed to like if I didn't, I think I would be playing a lot safer if I didn't have the info I did. But with having like that info for me, like as a player, like that, it benefited me. Like that's how I feel. And I was having this talk, like, I think like the info knowledge benefits like the better players more than it benefits like the players who like are kind of starting out or like not as like kind of like not at the level of like the high level players, right? And the reason why is because I think like, for example, right, at a local, someone's running a team that's like unique, they're creative, they put some tech on the team, right? And you're playing against a really like high level player, right? They obviously know all their options, they know what to do, but you have like this surprise move on your Pokemon, right? And like you catch them off guard and you kill them with this move because they weren't expecting it, right? Like that inherently will benefit like the more like casual player, you could say, word it, right? And like that's kind of my view on like teamless, like, and this is, I feel like this is something like people that are like better at the game are scared to say, like I like the open team sheet because it benefits me as a player, but overall for the casual scene, I think it's worse. And I think it like may hurt the player base a little bit more, right? But when you get to the level of like where you're a higher level player, it'll benefit you more. So it kind of like encourages you to get to that level almost. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like a trade-off almost.
I do. I do. I mean, there's such a in the transition from going from casual to professional Pokemon. When I think of a casual player, I think of they're just starting to understand what a best of 3 is. They're trying to see what the difference between a best of 3 and a best of 1 is, because it is completely different when you're not just going after random people on Battle Stadium. Now you're going against the same person with the same team, making changes in the second game, making changes in the third game, and then once you're kind of familiar with that and you're a little bit more seasoned in your tournament play, then that's when you start to realize like, okay, there are like legit sets here that I will see in every single tournament. And there are things that people will throw onto their Pokemon to really like throw a wrench in your plans. Whimsicott's a major Pokemon for that. You can basically throw like 6 or 7 different sets on that. Yeah, exactly.
It's the 4 move. Oh yeah, we call it the 4 move slot syndrome.
Right. Right.
That's what it has. Yeah.
Exactly. And then when you move into professional, that's when you start to see the ways that an open book will actually help you. So you're like, oh wow, these Pokemon have these sets. I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to play as scared as I normally would have because these Pokemon are just there in front of me.
Yeah, I mean, one question I have for you guys actually, what do you think is the most important move in Pokemon?
You know what? Kevin, what do you think I will say? I know what I think you'll say.
Okay, what do I think you'll say?
Yeah. I'll start. I'm pretty sure that Kevin's going to say protect.
It is protect.
Okay.
Mike will say expanding force.
That's it.
and I'll say protect. Yeah. So I actually think it's funny because sometimes like as you're looking at like competitive, right? Like some people will be like, oh, this move's the best move or something. Like some people say rock slide, right? But like,
oh yeah.
I just think the option of protect on almost every single Pokemon is always a good thing. Like there are very few Pokemon you can name where protect isn't beneficial on it.
Right.
Like for even Whimsicott, right? Like most people will try to abuse Whimsicott by faking out and airstreaming it, right? Mm-hmm. By having protect, you literally just deny them that option immediately. And like even on like support mons, it makes like so much sense. So I think like that move in general, like just in competitive, I think like it's funny because when I look at like more like beginner teams and like sometimes I go through the Reddit, I like try and give feedback to like help newer players out, right? Mm-hmm. And I see on a lot of teams like there's no protect, and I'm like, it's sometimes like I call it the protect test, right? If your team has 4 protects, you're probably doing it a little bit better than at least everyone else, right? Like obviously mons are dependent, but like that's kind of like when I'm like looking at teams and like people who are like building teams, that kind of like is indicative of like I think the level of building you're at a little bit, because like when you give yourself more of those options, it's helping you. Obviously like some really aggressive teams don't need as much protect on them, but like most of the time when you have a lot of them, it's a sign of an optimal team, Let's
dip into that a little bit more, because I'm just thinking about the fact that so you also are a coach. Kevin, you've been doing coaching yourself for quite a while. What I'm curious from both of you actually, what is the first thing that you would typically tell somebody that you're basically seeing for the first time? They've come to you for help. What is the first thing that you're trying to assess?
Well, for me, first thing I do is I try to gauge their play style. Once they tell me, I mean, there's some people that are like, okay, I like to play hyper offense, I like to play defense, I like to play trick room, and there's some people that are like, I don't know, I'm just kind of an open book, I'm ready to try this out, and that's where I'll go down the line, just grab a whole bunch of top teams, one of each, different archetype, and then just seeing what they perform best with. I do like to try to let them make a lot of the moves on their own, and I just kind of gauge whether or not they are making the right ones. But I think going back to the protect, like little protect talk, it takes a pretty seasoned player to understand why protect is so good. Because at first, especially players that usually come from like a singles background, like protect ain't that great in singles. But once you get to doubles, it's so crucial because there's so many more targets on the field.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I'm doing coaching, right? Actually, where I start, so I don't actually start with like play style stuff because I ask like a few questions to get a little more familiar of like what they've been playing with.
Mhm.
But for me, it's always been about like, the way you're able to use your team is like when you start with it in the team builder, right? So like, even though we may be using a standard team, I still go through the entire build process with them. So usually like the first hour that I do with people is almost fully dedicated to the actual team building aspect. And
Mhm.
it's because when you're directly involved in the process, for example, even if it's a standard team, right? When the options are being explained to you and the way you're breaking it down, the way you're EVing everything, it makes a lot more sense, right? So through coaching, I'm always like, okay, so we have this Pokemon, right? And I ask them, I'm like, what are the issues that this specific Pokemon has, right? Then they give me all the issues, right? I'm like, okay, so what do you think are good ways to address this, right? Sometimes they'll give like crazy niche Pokemon, and other times they'll give like a standard choice that I agree with, right? And I'm like, even so, if it's like a crazy niche Pokemon, I'm like, you need to look at this a little more objectively, right? Like, what Pokemon will solve this issue while not just looking for something that you like immediately, like something that like just like that you just like looking at, you know, like aesthetically, like it looks cool. Like I'm like, what fills this job in the best possible way for the team, right? And then we kind of go through it like that. So I usually go 6 mons first with them, right? So we get all the mons together, so we can kind of go through everything, abilities, all that stuff. And then I break down moves, because I think you always do moves second, because moves are kind of like how you fix some inherent issues with your team, right? If you're having a difficulty with a certain matchup, having a specific move helps you, right? And like kind of going through those one by one to kind of like break it down on a fundamental level to them. And then after that, right, you go through items, because if you start putting items early, you can end up in a situation where you're like, oh, I want to put an item on this and that, you know, and like you don't know which one to do. Where if you had taken the time to just go through it step by step, you kind of understand like how you want to like kind of like balance out the items throughout the team. And then finally I end up by just teaching them how to do like I teach them how to do EVs in like a way that's like optimal if you don't have any specific damage calculations in mind. So there's like a lot of nuanced things that go into it. And I'd love to talk about this again with you guys at some point, but like there's like a ton of like nuanced parts of like EVing, I think, that like don't really get talked about, because like sometimes, you know, you're in that situation, right, where you like just want to jump on ladder, but you don't want to have to make a complicated EV spread, right? But like 90% of the time, like, and this is something like there's a more optimal way to have a decent EV spread without like 252 get on ladder, you know? And like that's a big thing I try to teach players, because even though it's not like the most in-depth like EV like kind of like teaching, you know, it's like at least I'm giving you something to work with, so you're not going on with like a team that's like suboptimal for no reason, you know, like at least have it as optimal as possible before you're thinking about specific things you want to live or deal with, right? And then like if people have those ideas, we talk to them, we kind of go through it. And for EVing specifically, I can give like a little thing on the process. Like usually the way I break it down is speed, then it's your boosted stat when you're EVing, and then it's a bulk as your last. Like that's usually the way I break it down. And if boosted stat is your bulk or your speed, then obviously you do that first and then you do the rest.
So when you say
that's
boosted
kind of the way
stat,
I break it down. Like nature, that's like, so for example, modest, right? So you do your speed first, because speed is like kind of that thing that like you can't really work around. Like if you need to hit a certain speed tier, you need to like know how much EVs you're working with after that. Yeah. Then on your boosted stat, so I could talk about this a little bit. So on your boosted stat, there's always a part when you're scrolling through the EV scrubber. You guys can do this later. I don't know if you know about this, but basically there are certain like increments where you get a specific like 2-point bump instead of a 1-point bump from your EV investment,
because of being level 50,
and
right?
basically by optimizing to hit those, right, you're at least like you're giving yourself like a solid investment, right, that's still getting a lot out of that investment while leaving yourself EVs to invest in the rest, for example, if you want more bulk, right? So you may not want to fully invest into special attack, you may want to have some bulk, so you can just hit one of those increments and then put the rest into everything else.
Interesting. So there are all these stop gaps for figuring out when to, you know, put in a tiny bit more than you're really trying to invest to, and then also getting what you need in terms of speed or attack or defense or whatever you're actually trying to.
And the only like main exception to it really is just like if you're trying to hit a specific damage calc, then obviously you need to just invest however much it takes.
Right.
But like, yeah, that's normally like how I would kind of like break it down. It's like a little bit easier when you visualize it for like the people listening, like later on. Like maybe what you do is just go into like I'll give an example Pokemon, right? So go to Tyranitar, right? And if you invest, so let's say you go Adamant, right? Adamant Tyranitar, if you invest up to 44 EVs, so if you look at the difference from 36 to 44 EVs on Adamant Tyranitar, you'll see it goes from 174 to 176. And then if you keep scrolling it, you'll see like 2-point bumps as you scroll up. Like that's what I'm referring to. And like those are the kind of bumps you want to like keep in mind when you're like EVing, I think.
I didn't know that.
I know
I do.
It's so funny, yeah.
So then let's move on to the Streamer Cup, the X9 Streamer Cup. So this is the second one, I believe, starting on August 1st. Is that correct?
Yes, it will be on August 1st, Saturday, 2 p.m. EST.
Beautiful. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so basically, initially the idea started out as I was talking to another streamer, and I was just like, it'd be cool if we could all like do kind of like a tournament thing, you know, just like a small tournament thing for fun with all the streamers, right? And the first one ended up being really cool. Like obviously we had like Ashton, Colin, Necra, it was me, Jin, and like a few other people, right? And like it was a really cool idea. And I actually I had done a merch line a little bit ago, and my friend who like did the design with me and everything, I've been friends with him since basically middle school.
Wow.
So and he's like a really good graphic designer. So I was like, oh dude, like I was like, I'd love for you to do my like graphic design work, dude, right? So I started working with him really closely, and I was thinking about it. I was like, honestly, like Series 5 doesn't have that many events, so I'm like, why not just like run a really cool like a second version of the Streamer Cup and like really like invest a lot into it to make it like cool, you know, for like people to watch and stuff. So I talked to my friend Jack, who's also does my graphics now, and I was like, dude, would you be fine like if we like work through this, like made like kind of designs and everything, and like kind of like got players involved and like make it a bigger thing, right? You see like I tweet it out now like every few days. I like kind of show out the players, and like what's cool about it is it's like I think with this game sometimes it's very easy to like kind of isolate yourself within this like clique or like this kind of like group, right?
Absolutely.
And kind of trying to like reach out to all these streamers and like bring all these different audiences together has been like a really cool experience. And like I was just like, I kind of want to do something in the community, right, that like isn't just me like laddering on Battle Spot and like talking to my viewers. And it's not that that's a bad thing, you know, but like I want to do more for the community than just like that, you know. So I was like, I think this is a really cool idea. The first time it went really well, so I'm like, now I think we can do it on a bigger scale, right? Involve a lot more people, and it'll be really cool. Since this is coming out later, I can actually talk about this pretty freely, but we got like some really cool people involved, like Sierra. She's new into VGC, right? She's a new she's like obviously a very like well-known content creator. We have Aaron in, which is really cool. He agreed to join, and like just getting like all these bigger content creators into the kind of group and the Streamer Cup, and just being able to kind of just kind of like grow, like not necessarily like grow the VGC scene, but there's some audience, like people who watch those streamers who aren't necessarily as involved in VGC, right? And like by reaching out to those audiences, you're maybe like growing the game a little bit because more people are seeing it and they're like, oh, this is really cool, maybe I want to try this out at some point. And like having the bigger streamers in there is cool because, you know, it also kind of like helps like all the streamers kind of like have their audiences mix a little bit, and you know, like everyone is like friendly with each other, everyone's really nice. And like I've had nothing but good interactions with like everyone I've asked. So it's just like a really cool thing, I think, for the community in general, and just a way to just kind of bring everyone together and just like play Pokemon, you know. And it's pretty competitive too, because like we have a lot of good players there. So
absolutely,
I'm looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah. So comparing that to the first Streamer Cup, what were some of the things that you learned, I guess, from that you're applying in this one?
One thing that I didn't like about the first one, it was just kind of announced like the day before, because like it was just something we did on a whim, you know. And I think like being able to hype it up a little more now, and just like having that like fun of like, you know, like people don't know, because like obviously I can talk to you guys freely about it, but like on like Twitter, like you don't know who the last few people are gonna be, you know. And just like kind of like hyping that up and slowly adding them on, I think is really cool, right? Because it's like you're getting people excited for this kind of like event that just brings the community together. And I think like what I learned is just like for me, especially like I think after this one, like I'm just gonna go fully into the more like managing or like the running aspect of like the tournaments and just get like more streamers in, because I'd rather like not be involved and just like not be involved as in like playing and just like run them and like get more people involved, because I think like that benefits the community more than just like, because I feel like it's not that it's like selfish, but like I just don't want to like force myself in there if like I can get more people from like from Pokemon that like want to play, and that's fine. Like I don't mind stepping out. And I think like as this thing continues to grow, because I definitely want to run this again as long as this next one goes well. I think like it'd just be a really cool thing to just continue to just like grow and expand like as the scene grows as well. And I think it's just like a really like cool event. And I think like what I learned from the last one is there was definitely interest, but like I needed to put more time and like effort into making sure that it was like a really like bigger thing, and like actually had like kind of more production value behind it, I think. And that's kind of what I've been like trying to focus on for this one. So it's cool. Like we got a lot of like cool people in there, and I'm like really excited to work with them. A lot of them I already work with, so it's like it's really nice to just like have them involved, and just like be able to show off good Pokemon. Like that's what it is, right?
That's all and, that it is. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And so again, just for the people, this is starting August 1st, right? So by the time this actually comes out, we'll be in full swing.
Yeah. It'll have passed, actually, I'm pretty sure, because it's just a one-day double elimination tournament. So it's like,
we'll tweet it
but
out.
Obviously, it's going to be going for a while. So it'll be like going for the entire day on Saturday, pretty much.
Amazing. So
should be a good tournament, though.
So before we end, I do want to bring in one extra question just for the people in the audience who may be struggling right now to get into VGC. Because obviously, VGC is the main game format for Pokemon. There are a lot of people in the singles audience who haven't really given VGC a chance or haven't given it a try because they are a little intimidated of the format. What is a piece of advice that you can give to anybody who's wanting to start VGC now in 2020?
Yeah, biggest thing I'd say, use your resources and be smart about what resources you choose. So a big thing that I think is very important to analyze when you're looking at certain content creators, right? So, and this isn't to take a dig at Aaron or Wolf, I think they're both very accomplished players. They're very good players, they've obviously established themselves because they're very good players, right? But like as you're seeing as like the content creators are getting bigger, I think you're like, for example, like Wolf's channel, right? Like his videos are optimized towards what a lot of people want to see, right? Which is like cool Pokemon, whatever, on a team, right? Yeah. So for example, Palossand, right? Something like that. But those teams don't necessarily offer you anything competitively, right? In terms, it's a fun team, right? It's a fun team to run, but it's not going to give you an advantage competitively. So I think like really like kind of looking for streams that break down Pokemon in an intuitive way where you watch it, right? And you're like, I'm learning something from this. I'm learning his thought process, right? He's explaining to me why this team is good, using like teams that don't just have like a special Pokemon on it, but have like a very proven, consistent like functionality to them. Taking advantage of Twitter, right? The extra like team resources you have there, through streams, like obviously try to rely on streamers who have like a little more results. And that's not to say like it can't be other streamers, right? Because like everyone has their own merit, right?
Yep.
There's some people who are just really good at playing online and just haven't gone to many tournaments, and that's fine. But like be selective about who you're going to for like information and all that stuff, because it's very easy, I think, especially with like so many people getting into content creation now, to get like misinformed by people who don't know as much as like maybe some of the players you want to be learning from.
Right.
There
are people who will give out the wrong information, but say it so authoritatively that it almost seems like that is the only answer.
Yeah. And it's, I always encourage people. So this is something that I find so interesting. I think some streamers and like people are just afraid to do this because like, obviously it's like they want to build an audience that's like kind of like focused on them. Right. But sometimes like even when coaching, like people will be like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, but like I'm also doing coaching with someone else. I'm like, don't be sorry for that, man. Like
that's great.
I'm like, that's a good thing. I'm like, that's a good thing. I'm like, you shouldn't just be relying on me for information. I'm like, you should be trying to like find multiple ways of information that help you out as a player, right? Because if you just trust everything I tell you and I give you the wrong information, right? Like who's gonna, who's gonna check me, and like that's the thing. I always encourage people, like even when I offer like my opinions and thoughts, I'm like, don't be afraid to watch other streamers too. I'm like, I don't get offended. It's fine. Like I get it. You want to watch other people as well to learn something from. And I think like people are afraid to say this stuff because like obviously they want to keep their audience, right? They want to retain their viewers, but like it's important too to encourage like people to really just like think for themselves and just kind of find what works for them, because like the way I teach people won't work for everyone. And the way that someone else like talks about Pokemon won't work for everyone. Everyone learns differently. And I really think that like Amon's, like I said in the beginning of this, I think it was like one of the first things I said. I think Pokemon itself, your results are really indicative of the effort you're putting towards the game, right? Because like you can say, oh, I'm working really hard. I'm using all these rental codes from streamers, right? And you're like, I'm on ladder, right? Playing Master Ball and like I'm doing badly. But are you really taking time after you lose those games to look through your games and see what you could have done better in one of those 5 turns, what you could have done to not put yourself in that situation where like you got rock slide flinched, right? What you could have done to not have something unfortunate happen to you, or could I have led better? Is it a team issue? Is it a playing issue, right? Where are the issues with this team, or is it with me? And I think like all these things are very important because I think like Pokemon is a huge test of like your self-analysis almost, right? Because like in the end, the person who's going to be like fixing your mistakes is going to be yourself. Obviously you can get help, but it's primarily going to be you.
Right.
And I think like I didn't mean to go into like a long-winded thing there, but that's just kind of like how I view, I think, just learning the game in general and just like using your resources.
All right. And with that, I will let that be the final word from JoeUX9, the final thought. Before we end off completely though, Joe, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I do have a YouTube. I do YouTube. I make content. I'm actually gonna be posting all my Players Cup stuff there once like the last stream happens.
Great.
So it'll be a lot more active after this. But for the most part, I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday on Twitch. I have a Discord as well, linked to my Twitch channel as well. Also for all like of my subs, I also do have coaching that I do every Friday. So it's like a public session with all like subscribers. So that's like a fun resource to use if you have like the extra Prime or something. And I also do private coaching as well. And that's pretty much it. Oh, and Twitter. I sometimes tweet funny things or important things. So I guess that's good to check out.
Beautiful. Kevin, where can people find you?
X-Reservation, Twitter, and Instagram.
And then, of course, you can find me at StillJustMike on Twitter and Instagram. You can find the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts at Pokesports Podcast. Pokesports, a competitive Pokemon podcast. Find us on YouTube at Pokesports or on Patreon and Instagram at Pokesports Podcast. Guys, we will see you in the next episode. Joe, again, I just want to thank you so much for coming on, just being such a wealth of knowledge for Pokemon. You are a real treat, and we want to have you back sometime.
No, for sure. Thank you for having me on, man. Appreciate it, as always.
All right, everybody, we will speak to you next time. See you then.